Good evening, traveler. You've wandered into myth-taken dreams, a place where timelines tangle, truths wobble, and bedtime stories rewrite history just enough to make it magical. Each tale unfolds from a library that never existed, where historians whisper with poets and facts arrive fashionably late. Tonight, we unspool another tale from the flickering archive because bedtime deserves a version of history to pique the imagination. So fluff your pillow, turn down the logic, and lean into the lore. Once upon a time, in a land of whirling dust storms, arguably questionable camels, and very large armies, there was a boy named Alexander. Now, Alexander wasn't just any ordinary boy. He wasn't content with collecting bugs or trading goats, although, let's be fair, goats are a highly underrated form of currency. No, Alexander had one very particular idea in mind: conquering the world. Now, the world at the time was rather large and inconveniently divided into separate kingdoms, all of which had very different ideas about what the world should look like. There were Persians who wore large hats, Egyptians who built very impressive pyramids, and Greeks who, for some reason, insisted on talking about philosophy while eating olives. Alexander, however, wasn't interested in philosophy. He was interested in winning. One day, when he was just a young prince, Alexander looked out over the horizon and had a eureka moment. "I could conquer all of this," he said, in the way that all future conquerors say it, with a lot of confidence and absolutely no idea how they're going to actually do it. "I'll start with the neighbors. Then I'll move on to the next neighbors. And then, well, we'll see what happens after that." He didn't waste any time. In fact, he probably wasted less time than someone who just realized their socks didn't match. At the age of 20, which, frankly, is a bit young to start world domination, he became king of Macedonia. Now, Macedonia was not a small place, but it wasn't exactly the world yet, which is what Alexander had in mind. And so, with a lot of very large armies and a slightly overinflated sense of self-worth, he set off to conquer the world, one country at a time. First stop, Greece. The Greeks were not exactly thrilled at the idea of being conquered by a young upstart, but Alexander had a slight advantage. He was really good at battles. He was the sort of person who could lead an army into battle while wearing a shiny helmet, waving a sword around, and making it look like he had everything under control. Needless to say, the Greeks didn't stand a chance. Alexander marched right in and said, "All right, you're all part of my empire now. Don't worry, there'll be plenty of room for philosophy, but mostly we're going to get on with the conquering part." Then came Persia, which was a whole other kettle of fish. Now the Persians, led by their king Darius, were quite proud of their large, fancy empire. They had a lot of land, a lot of fancy palaces, and a lot of very serious people who were good at, well, being serious. Darius was not the sort of king to back down from a fight, and he did not appreciate being told what to do by a 20-year-old with delusions of grandeur. But, as it turns out, Alexander was not easily discouraged. In fact, he was the sort of person who liked challenges, and he decided that defeating Darius would be his big moment. He assembled his army, marched it across the desert, and faced Darius in a massive battle at Gorgamla, which sounds like the name of a very cool new video game, but was actually a very real place. After a lot of shouting, running, and general chaos, Alexander emerged victorious. Darius, meanwhile, decided that running away was a much better idea. Alexander now controlled the Persian Empire. It was, as they say, a minor victory. Now, you might think this would be enough for any reasonable conqueror. After all, who needs more than one giant empire? But Alexander, as it turns out, was not a reasonable conqueror. No, he wanted more. He didn't just want to rule a few countries. He wanted to rule everything from here to the edge of the world. So, he marched on. Next, he set his sights on Egypt, which, quite conveniently, had just the sort of big pyramids that Alexander could imagine himself standing on top of, wearing a crown and waving at the people below. The Egyptians, not terribly excited about the idea of being invaded, tried their best to defend themselves, but Alexander was one of those people who always managed to win by outthinking his enemies. He charmed the locals, established himself as a divine ruler, because why not? And had a lovely visit to the oracle at Siwa, where he was told he was a son of the gods. Naturally, he was thrilled. Who wouldn't want to be the son of the gods? Then came the grand finale, India. At this point, Alexander had conquered a lot of the known world, and he was feeling pretty confident, probably even a bit too confident. How hard can it be to take over India? He thought. After all, how many elephants could there possibly be? But India, as it turned out, was a bit trickier than expected. The Indian kings were tough, their armies were large, and their elephants were absolutely huge. There was one battle where Alexander's troops fought elephants the size of mountains, and while they didn't exactly win, they did manage to confuse the elephants enough to avoid being squashed. But eventually, even Alexander had to admit that he'd bitten off more than he could chew. His soldiers, after years of marching, battling, and probably being very tired of wearing armor, decided they'd had enough. They refused to march any farther, and Alexander, who was, let's face it, a little tired himself, had to turn back. By this point, he had conquered a vast stretch of land that stretched from Greece all the way to India. It was probably the biggest empire the world had ever seen at that point. Now, Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was also a builder. After each conquest, he founded cities, which, naturally, were all named after him, encouraged people to mix cultures, and even spread Greek ideas and philosophy, like a very ambitious travel guide. He became, for all intents and purposes, a legend, a man whose name would echo across history, even though his actual empire didn't survive long after his death. But for a time, Alexander the Great was exactly what he set out to be, a conqueror of the world, a man whose ambition was so grand that even the gods themselves would probably have raised an eyebrow. He was, quite simply, the sort of person who knew exactly what he wanted, even if it was a bit too much. And so, after many years of conquering and building and being generally rather impressive, Alexander died at the age of 32, which, really, when you think about it, is a bit young to conquer the whole world, don't you think? The end. Or, at least, the beginning of lots of very interesting history lessons.